And Justice John Roberts said corporations and unions can give unlimited amounts. The only trouble being that we don't have cash. We have people that we can have on the phone banks. We have people who can do the lit drops. We can have people doing the get out the vote. That's the traditional strength of unions.
Yeah, you've got the same First Amendment right. It's just a little harder to use it.
Yeah, right. Okay. Now, time for a public disclosure on my part. For the last several years, about 4.5 years, I have represented afl-cio on the QUI Commission and its successors, the Minnesotans for Impartial Courts, and now the Coalition for an Impartial Judiciary. And to make a long story short, a constitutional amendment is being proposed to provide for public performance evaluation that you had mentioned, and in a retention election. In the public performance evaluation, on what grounds should how should a judge be evaluated?
I think the proposals, as I've seen, focus largely on how the judge goes about doing his or her job. Is she prompt? Does she get work done? Does he get his calendars taken care of quickly? Does he follow the rules? Does he treat people courteously? Has he had any behavior or performance problems? It gets a little harder when you try to evaluate the merits of a particular decision.
Yeah.
Is a decision in case X the right decision? Well, you think about it. If in case X, it's probably been going on for 2 or 3 years. You've got lawyers on both sides making all sorts of arguments. The issues aren't clear. They aren't simple. And in order to evaluate whether the judge did the right or wrong thing, you'd have to actually go in and act like an appellate court. Well, that's what appellate courts are for. Okay. Now, if the evaluation committee says, this judge is regularly reversed by the Minnesota Court of Appeals, that's going to tell them something. Or if they say the Minnesota Court of Appeals or the Supreme Court criticizes this judge for the way they do their job, that's something citizens should know. But to evaluate the merits of each judicial decision is really difficult. But citizens under this proposal are going to get far more information, meaningful information, than they get now. They're going to have disinterested people, lawyers and lay people, who are going to look at how the judge does his job, and they're going to say, this judge is qualified to continue to serve.
And the knowledge of this is much more easily obtained in our improved technology age, and as this, if the bill authorizing the amendment passes the next legislature, then it goes on the ballot, and if that's approved, a couple of very big hurdles.
Yeah.
But the technology is such that we can find out a lot more readily than we could 5 years ago or 10 or 15 years
well,
ago.
and you'll have some assurance that the information you're getting is as neutral as it can be. That it really is independent, and it'll give people enough information to make a meaningful choice, as opposed to looking at those ballots and saying, I don't have a clue. And the knock on this proposal that so many people have articulated is it's going to take away our ability to elect judges. And that's absolutely wrong. I submit it's going to give them far better information. And you said it was 46% of the people cast votes in elections. You're going to have a lot more because people are going to know what they're voting for.
So I might mention also that afl-cio has endorsed these proposals. Now let's change gears a bit and talk about funding of the court system in Minnesota. Something as Chief Justice that was very near and dear to your heart.
Well, it was near. I don't know how dear it was.
Yeah, well, we can have a play on words on the word dear, too.
Yes.
Yes. But have our courts been immune from budget cuts of recent years?
No, not at all. The courts have shared significantly with the reduced resources that all of government is facing. I heard an interesting presentation from the state demographer.
Tom Gillespie.
Yeah,
Yes.
Good, very thoughtful. And he said, look, we're facing a new normal. Our population is aging. Tax revenues are going to be down. It isn't just an economy thing, it is a social thing. And we have to think about how we can redesign our government and all our social organizations to deal with the new normal. And so courts have had significant cuts to their budgets over the last 6 years. They're operating right now 10% short-staffed, which means that now it takes 1 out of 4 serious felony cases in Minnesota takes more than a year to get to trial. And that's really a problem because, a lot of people when they hear that say, well, who cares about some defendant, if they have to cool their heels. But we're talking about having a year of uncertainty for victims. We're talking about witnesses whose memories are going to fade. It's much harder to obtain a conviction with a long delay. So the courts have had significant cuts to their budgets, but they have been among all the state arms, because they're not an agency of the state, they're an independent branch of government. They have been by far the most proactive and the most creative in trying to figure out how to use technology, for example, to get the work done with fewer people.
And justice delayed is justice denied.
In almost every case, there isn't a lawyer around that is willing to say a case gets better as it ages.
Yes.
Nobody likes that.
So as citizens, what can we do to encourage full funding for the courts?
I've been at a number of public discussions on the budget and how you spend the limited resources that you have. And people are appropriately passionate about things, different things. Some people think education is the thing that should be the first priority. Some think healthcare, some think transportation, some think the courts. But what I try to explain to them is when you don't have enough money to go around, you have to start making some choices and you have to set some priorities. Now, the judicial branch of the state of Minnesota, if you gave them all the money they wanted, it would still be about 2% of the state budget. Wow. Okay? So if you make them deal with cuts, which has happened over the last 6 years, but you're still talking such a small percentage of the state budget that if you can adequately fund the courts, if you're making a list of priorities, you say, okay, courts should be at the top because, number one, the first provision of our state constitution, Article 1, Section 1, says the object of government is to ensure the benefit, protection, and safety of the people. More or less it says that. I don't have the quote exactly. The way you do that is by passing laws. It doesn't do anybody any good to pass a law if you can't enforce it. You can't enforce it if your courts don't function. And so when we've got courts that are shutting down part of the time, we've got courts that are taking way too long to get to cases. We've got courts that are hurting people through and not really having time to consider them. We're not doing that. So if you say that is a paramount concern and it only costs a little bit, let's adequately fund that. Let's make sure the courts aren't prevented from doing their job. Then let's go worry about all the other things that we've got to worry about because we've got that one piece taken care of. So I think that's the message that the voters should be giving to their legislators. Make a list of priorities, put the courts up on top because they're so important to how our society functions. If we don't have a lawful society, if we're a lawless society, then education doesn't do you any good. Healthcare is meaningless. Social policies don't succeed if you don't have a safe and lawful society. So I think every voter should tell their legislator fully fund the courts. Don't overfund them. Don't give them too much money. Make them prove that they're getting the right amount. But don't squeeze them. Don't cut them down. Don't scrimp there, because the cost is very little, but the cost is really high.
Yeah. So there is a need for public defenders. There is a need for court interpreters.
Yep.
As people are faced with very traumatic time of their life if they're in court, whether it's...
Well, you've got a constitutional right if you're charged with a crime to have a lawyer. And, we have to have the resources to pay for the public defenders. And again, if you think, well, why are we coddling those criminals? There isn't a judge or a prosecutor around who would deny the importance of public defenders in the courtroom, because if you don't have a lawyer for the defendant, and he's supposed to have one, then the judge has to wait, the prosecutor has to wait. If they go ahead and do something without the lawyer there, whatever they do is at risk. I mean, the prosecutors are as vocal as anybody about saying, let's make sure those public defenders have enough resources, because the system has to work together.
Okay. Now let's go back to the proposed amendment to the Constitution.
Sure.
Could you quickly review for us the what's involved in getting an amendment?
Well, the legislature has to vote to put it on the ballot, okay? And it's a resolution that outlines the terms of the constitutional amendment, and it would be something like, be it resolved that Article something, Section something of the state constitution be amended to read as follows. And they would take the section of the Constitution now that says judges stand for election every 6 years, and it would say judges stand for retention elections, which means they don't have an opponent. It means that they simply are judged on their own merits, okay, every 4, 6, or 8 years, whatever it is. If the Constitution is amended, then it goes back to the legislature, and the legislature works out all the details. Okay, but you know, I think the argument is, if you've got an issue with the details, don't let that stand in the way of getting the Constitution amended. I think it's terribly important.
Now, the details would include the makeup of the performance evaluation commission and so forth.
Right.
That can be passed through
That's
law.
through the legislature.
Yeah, and
but you know, and I've heard a lot of concerns about that it's going to be elitist and it's going to put all this power in a small group of people. I chaired that group for 5 years, you know, the equivalent of it.
Yeah.
We had people from all over the state, lawyers and lay people, and it really didn't matter, in my experience, what their background was or what you thought their propensities were. As a group, they worked incredibly hard to be fair, to be open, and to really pick the best candidates, regardless of what their political or other persuasions were. They did a good job, and I'm completely comfortable with the idea that the next commission under the constitutional amendment will do as well.
My good friend, award-winning director Roger Carlson is telling me I have to wrap it up, so I'm not real happy with him right now, and he may not be my good friend anymore. But I thank you for sharing your insights into our court system gained through your many years of experience and service to the state of Minnesota. And we urge our viewers to learn about judicial candidates on the ballot in 2010 and to watch for proposed changes in the way that we elect our judges at the state legislature in 2012 and as we go into the 2011, as we go into the 2012 election. So I thank you, and I thank you, the viewers, for watching.